Elia's brand had never been a fan of diplomacy, mostly because it involved talking to people who looked down on him for reasons that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with their own inflated egos. Yet here he was, striding across the glossy, iridescent floors of Laurenthia's royal palace, trying not to trip over floating platforms that hummed faintly as if they were aware of his presence and disapproved. He muttered under his breath about alien interior design, comparing it unfavorably to a badly tuned neon carnival. A floating tray of drinks drifted past him like a gelatinous comet, and Elias reached out instinctively, knocking one over and splattering a glowing orange liquid across the polished floor. A robotic attendant hissed in alarm, scuttling after a mop-like appendage while Elias threw up his hands. "I swear I only mean to make a good impression," he said, loud enough for anyone in a 3-meter radius to hear. No one seemed to notice. Typical. The palace was alive with beings of every imaginable shape and color, their forms bending physics in ways that made Elias feel like he was in a constantly glitching holopark. And then he saw her. Lyriel. She was standing off to the side, hands awkwardly folded in front of her, long ears flicking slightly as if tasting the air for lies. Her hair shimmered faintly, like dark silver threads caught in some alien current of light, and her eyes were too sharp, too calm, for someone constantly called the weakest and ugliest princess. Her shoulders slumped slightly, an attempt at invisibility, a cloak of mediocrity she wore in public. And yet there was a spark there, something quiet and unassuming, that made her impossible to ignore. Elias wasn't expecting anyone to trip him into destiny, but that was exactly what happened. One moment he was trying to dodge a pair of elegantly hovering diplomats. The next he collided with Lyriel, who was trying not to bump into him, and the collision sent a tray of fizzing drinks spinning through the air. One landed on a floating console, causing a brief but dramatic explosion of sparks and holographic projections that screamed error, protocol violation. "Oh, Elias started, only for Lyriel to pin him with a glare that made him momentarily freeze. Then she did something nobody in the court expected. She pointed at him, straight at him. Her hand was unsteady, her voice clear. "He will be mine." Elias blinked, the court blinked, the floating attendants blinked. Somewhere a small drone coughed, sparks in shock. Did you just pick me for what?" He stammered, realizing too late that he was probably supposed to bow or kneel, or do some complicated alien dance involving 3 rotations and a polite sneeze. Lyriel tilted her head, her long ears twitching. "You heard me," she said calmly. "You're mine." Then she stepped back as if daring anyone to contradict her. The court erupted into scandalized whispers. One of the taller princesses of the royal house fainted theatrically. Another rolled her eyes so hard Elias thought they might actually detach. Elias rubbed the back of his neck, muttering, "Great. First day in alien politics, and I'm already a hostage or a husband or both." Lyriel didn't seem to care about his confusion. She glanced at the floor, then at him again, flicking a small device in her palm that emitted a soft chime. The device seemed to pulse with her mood, and to Elias it sounded almost like a faint snicker. "You're a disaster," she said flatly, and he couldn't tell if it was an insult or a compliment. The next few hours were a blur. Elias tripped over alien carpets that floated 3 inches above the floor, mispronounced greetings that were somehow considered offensive, and accidentally insulted the royal cook by calling the main dish slightly aggressive. Yet, through every blunder, Lyriel followed him with her signature combination of deadpan observation and subtle manipulation. If he veered too close to disaster, she nudged him, or sometimes did nothing at all and let the universe teach him lessons the hard way. And each time her long ears twitched like twin antennas, reading conversations and catching lies that humans could never hear. By the time dinner rolled around, Elias had learned 3 things. 1. Alien wine could combust if insulted. 2. Staring at Lyriel's ears was more distracting than staring at a Starship jump drive. And 3. She was far more dangerous than anyone gave her credit for. At the dinner table, while dignitaries debated trade treaties that sounded like a mashup of poetry and nuclear physics, Lyriel leaned over and whispered, "If you spill anything else, you're volunteering for cleanup duty on the gravity-twisted gardens." Elias tried to protest but was cut off by a low chuckle. "You'll learn to respect the gravity of things soon enough," she said, and for some reason the pun made him laugh despite the situation. The entire court looked on, confused, as Elias muttered something about gravity being a theory and puns being a weapon of mass distraction. Later, when the palace quieted and floating lights dimmed to a soft glow, Elias found himself on the balcony, staring at the city below. Towers bent at impossible angles, streams of light connecting spires like veins of energy, and ships hovering silently above, like flocks of metallic birds. Lyriel appeared silently beside him, her long ears brushing against the air as if catching a secret melody. "You're supposed to be scared," she said almost teasingly, "but you seem amused." Elias shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Amused is better than dead," he replied. "You might survive this place if you keep that attitude," she said, a smirk tugging at her lips. Then, with no warning, she tilted her head and said, "I picked you because everyone else is too boring. And also, you look like you can handle chaos without crying." Elias laughed outright. "I'll take that as a compliment, even if it sounds like a threat." Lyriel's ears twitched in amusement, and Elias felt an odd sense of comfort. In a palace that treated her like an afterthought, she had chosen him, an outsider, clumsy, sarcastic, barely competent, as her anchor. And in that choice lay a hint of something far greater, something neither of them fully understood yet. Somewhere, a small robot muttered something about spilled drinks and protocol violations, and Elias thought he heard it giggle. Perhaps this palace wasn't entirely against him, or perhaps he was simply the universe's favorite punchline. Either way, the night stretched on, and the court slept unaware that the weakest, ugliest princess had already claimed him as hers, and that claim would ripple through every corner of Laurentia in ways that would be as unpredictable as Elias himself. The first day of his interstellar misadventures had ended, but the story had only just begun. And somewhere in the palace, Lyriel's long ears twitched, already planning her next move, confident that no one, not even the galaxy, had seen her full potential yet. Elias woke to a palace that seemed alive in ways he had not yet fully appreciated. The walls pulsed faintly, as if breathing, the floors gently shifting to accommodate the footsteps of thousands of invisible attendants. He tried to remind himself this was normal, that the Laurenthian palace was, by design, a living structure. Yet the first time he stepped wrong and nearly launched himself into a hovering chandelier, he decided normal was a relative term best avoided. By the time he reached the breakfast hall, his hair sticking out in ways gravity would have sworn were impossible, he found Lyriel waiting. She was perched on a low bench, long ears tilted forward like twin radars scanning for trouble, her eyes gleaming with quiet amusement. "Good morning, disaster in residence," she said, voice light, not unkind, as if she were already anticipating the day's inevitable chaos. "Try not to knock over anything combustible before breakfast. It's a new palace rule I just invented." Elias groaned. "Is that rule retroactive to last night?" Lyriel tilted her head, smirk tugging at her lips. "We'll see," she said. Her ears twitched, catching whispers from across the hall, tiny, precise echoes of conversations, yet she didn't flinch at the commotion. "You're here to learn how the court functions. You'll either survive or make everyone laugh, and in my experience, the second option is safer." That morning unfolded like a parade of alien absurdities. Elias fumbled through greetings that required 3 synchronized gestures, a smile that conveyed loyalty without envy, and a peculiar head tilt meant to indicate he was listening while not actually understanding anything. He failed spectacularly, and each time, Lyriel either corrected him or subtly manipulated the situation so it appeared he had succeeded. Once, when he mispronounced the name of a minor duke, she leaned over, whispered something in his ear, and the duke bowed in relief. Elias later realized she had redirected his blunder through the palace acoustics so it sounded like a tribute, and the duke was none the wiser. "Why am I not allowed to leave this place?" he muttered as they walked through halls lined with floating gardens, their petals glowing softly, humming tunes that humans could almost hear, and some that humans couldn't. Lyriel glanced back, her ears flicking sharply. "Because you're mine," she said, as if that explained everything. Elias blinked at her, then glanced at the floating vines, wondering if she was joking or serious. By her expression, it was impossible to tell. The day's lessons were not all bureaucratic. Lyriel dragged Elias into a training arena disguised as a ballroom, where combat simulations floated in midair as holographic constructs, mimicking alien attackers with lethal precision. Elias assumed he would stumble, fail, and be laughed at mercilessly. Instead, Lyriel used subtle manipulations, a tap here, a flick there, guiding his movements almost invisibly. When he executed a particularly awkward spin, one that would have sent him crashing into the ceiling, the holograms fell apart around him as if conceding defeat. He stood, panting, confused, and Lyriel's ears twitched. "See. You're a natural," she said, voice full of mischief. Elias realized she considered his luck a skill, which in her court was apparently the same thing as competence. Later, as the sun, or what passed for a sun in Laurenthia's orbit, shifted the color of the sky from green to violet, they wandered the palace corridors. A minor crisis unfolded when a small council of alien dignitaries attempted to sabotage one of Lyriel's proposals by activating a gravity-shifting device under the floor. Elias tripped, grabbed a control panel by accident, and sent the entire hall spinning upside down. Holographic images of the dignitaries' carefully arranged plans floated around them like confetti. Lyriel, barely blinking, said, "Accidents are only bad if someone dies. Consider this creative problem-solving." Elias wanted to point out that no one had asked for his help, but she was already leading him out with a satisfied smirk, her long ears catching every whispered complaint. Dinner was another adventure. The food was not merely exotic, it was sentient. Plates shifted under his hands, small appetizers changed flavors mid-chew, and Elias accidentally insulted an entree by calling it too lively. Lyriel's amusement was quiet but palpable. "Complaining about the menu is unwise," she whispered. "It bites back." Elias was sure she was joking until a small piece of animated pastry wriggled toward him like a tiny, caramel-colored snake. He yelped, she laughed, and the court stared, mystified at this odd human-alien dynamic. As night fell, a small crisis reached them quietly in the palace corridors. A rogue drone, probably disoriented by Elias' earlier chaos, began scanning the halls, tagging everyone as potential threats. Lyriel approached it, her ears flicking rapidly as she analyzed the device. "Give me a moment," she said, her voice calm. Within minutes, she had reprogrammed the drone, not only preventing it from attacking anyone but also turning it into an unwitting delivery service for Elias' personal belongings, which he had accidentally scattered across the palace all day. By the time Elias collapsed into the guest chambers, exhaustion weighing him down, he realized that despite all his missteps, the princess had been guiding him, quietly, cunningly, almost invisibly. Her long ears twitched in her sleep, catching the faint hum of palace security and distant whispers of court intrigue, and even in rest she seemed to command the environment around her. Elias stared at the ceiling, wondering how someone so underestimated could be so dangerous, so competent, and so absurdly entertaining. He was still trying to comprehend her confidence when a small, mechanical voice piped up from the corner. "User Elias Brand, tomorrow's agenda includes surviving another day without embarrassing yourself beyond repair. Probability of success, 12.7%. Elias groaned. Lyriel appeared in the doorway, long ears tilting, an almost invisible grin tugging at her lips. "I'd round that up to 15%, she said. "Optimism is key." Elias realized that in this palace, he was not just a human visitor or a pawn in alien politics. He was the companion of someone who saw potential in him where no one else would, who found humor in his failures, and who manipulated chaos as easily as breathing. And somehow, despite all the improbable odds, he felt a strange thrill at the thought of navigating the rest of this unpredictable, absurd, and strangely charming world by her side. Somewhere in the distance, the palace hummed, drones buzzed, and the stars of Laurentia winked in impossible colors. Elias, exhausted and exasperated, laughed aloud. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he was beginning to suspect that with Lyriel, the so-called weakest and ugliest princess, by his side it might just be entertaining enough to survive. The sky over Laurentia's capital was a swirl of violet and green, streaked with the trails of ships that glimmered like comets caught in the planet's strange magnetic currents. Elias stood at the edge of the palace balcony, watching the city below, trying to convince himself that nothing about today could possibly go wrong. That lasted until a small hover drone zipped past, trailing sparks like fireworks before narrowly missing his shoulder. He ducked reflexively, muttering something about interstellar air traffic violations, and turned to find Lyriel already beside him. Her long ears twitched in a way that made him wonder if they were secretly communicating with the city itself. "Relax," she said, her voice calm and deceptively casual. "Or don't. Either way, it won't change what's about to happen." Ilias swallowed. Somehow that was more terrifying than if she'd yelled at him. Within the hour, the alarm system in the palace started blaring. A sharp, synthetic shriek that sent floating plates skittering off dining tables and awakened every bioluminescent plant in the halls. A rogue faction of mercenaries had breached the city defenses, seeking to exploit the political turmoil of the royal court. They were armed with energy weapons that could melt steel like butter and drones that moved with precision far beyond anything Ilias had ever seen. The palace, normally a symphony of gentle hums and floating lights, turned into chaos incarnate. Lyriel, untouched by the panic, walked beside Ilias into the main hall. "Stick with me," she said, voice light as she tapped a control panel with her long fingers. Immediately, the floor beneath the invading drones shifted, gravity warping just enough to throw their formations into disarray. Ilias, who had tripped over the same floors countless times, was amazed to see her manipulate the environment as if she were painting with invisible brushes. So the floors, you're basically a living blueprint of doom, right?" he said, ducking a laser blast that ricocheted off a wall. "Precisely," Lyriel replied, smirking, "except prettier and with better ears." They moved through the palace like a perfectly synchronized duo, Ilias' clumsy reflexes countered by her subtle nudges, and her strategies amplified by his unpredictability. At one point, he accidentally activated a holographic projection of the palace gardens, which confused the mercenaries so thoroughly that they ran headlong into a force field, leaving Ilias blinking in disbelief. Lyriel leaned over, whispering, "That was intentional," and Ilias wondered if she had been laughing at him all along. The battle shifted to the palace courtyard, where the invaders deployed a massive, spider-like mech that seemed impervious to conventional attacks. Ilias froze at the sight, but Lyriel merely twitched her ears and tapped a panel on her wrist device. A hidden energy conduit beneath the courtyard hummed to life, sending pulses of light that guided Ilias' movements, turning his desperate dodges into a strategic dance. Somehow, what had felt like chaos yesterday now felt like choreography. "You're actually helping?" Ilias asked mid-spin, narrowly avoiding a crushing mechanical leg. "Of course," Lyriel replied. "You're amusing, and I've grown attached to my amusement." By the time the mech faltered and collapsed in a spectacular shower of sparks, the rogue mercenaries were in full retreat, pursued by drones that had been reprogrammed during the fight, some of which Ilias accidentally reprogrammed again, causing them to chase their own shadows in amusing, harmless loops. The palace, battered but intact, hummed a victorious tune, and Lyriel's ears twitched with satisfaction. In the aftermath, the court gathered, buzzing with awe and confusion. For years, Lyriel had been dismissed as weak and awkward, her eccentricities ridiculed. Now she stood triumphant, her long ears brushing the air as if gathering the city's gratitude. And Ilias, once a bumbling human outsider, had become an integral part of the story, not merely by luck but through the trust and bond forged in the fires of chaos. A senior advisor cleared his throat, muttering, "Princess Lyriel, your unconventional strategies have saved the city. And you, sir," he gestured vaguely toward Ilias. "You did something too, I think." Ilias flushed, realizing that in the eyes of this alien court, he was no longer just a visitor. He had survived, contributed, and somehow, through mistakes, accidents, and occasional insight, had earned a place alongside the princess. Lyriel leaned toward him, her ears twitching with amusement, and whispered, "I told them you were mine, I was right." He laughed, the sound unsteady but genuine. "You make claiming people sound dangerous and flattering at the same time." "Both," she said simply, her eyes sparkling. "That's how power works, and apparently so does friendship." In the following days, the court adjusted to the new reality. Rival factions, previously dismissive, were now cautious, unsure of how to approach the princess whose weakness had been revealed as cunning brilliance. Ilias moved more confidently through the palace, still prone to the occasional disaster, but now aware of the hidden rhythms of the place, guided by Lyriel's subtle instructions. He joked, laughed, and sometimes stumbled, but each misstep was met with amusement rather than condemnation. He also noticed changes within himself. The human who had once been cynical, sarcastic, and eager to avoid responsibility had grown, learning patience, strategy, and a capacity for trust he had never considered possible. Lyriel's steady presence, her quiet intelligence, and her mischievous humor had challenged him in ways that no battlefield, training module, or diplomatic mission ever could. He had become not just her companion but a partner in the true sense, navigating chaos with skill, laughter, and a shared sense of purpose. On the evening of the final ceremony honoring their victory, the palace floated in a tranquil glow, the city below humming with a peaceful energy. Elias and Lyriel stood side by side on the balcony, overlooking the alien skyline. She nudged him gently with her elbow, her long ears brushing his shoulder. "You did well," she said. "Better than I expected." "I had a good teacher," Elias replied. "Also a lot of dumb luck." "Luck isn't dumb if you use it right," she said. Her smirk was quiet but full of warmth. "And I like that you're mine, just as I promised." Elias laughed, a full, unrestrained laugh that carried across the palace terraces. The city, the stars, the strange alien sky, it all felt larger, stranger, and infinitely more wondrous than before. He had arrived as a bumbling outsider, destined to stumble through alien halls and ridiculous ceremonies. Now he stood as someone who had grown, learned, and survived not by sheer force, but through trust, humor, and unexpected partnership. Lyriel's ears twitched again as if she were already plotting the next absurd, impossible adventure. Elias smiled, ready to follow, ready to stumble, and ready to laugh through it all. The galaxy was wide, full of chaos, danger, and impossible beauty, and somehow with Lyriel at his side, it felt like home. As the last lights of the city shimmered and the hum of the palace settled into a gentle pulse, Elias realized that the story of a human and the weakest, ugliest alien princess was not one of weakness or ridicule. It was a story of discovery, of unexpected strength, and of